All right, so today we're going to paint glass. So I've already got my wood cradle board. This is a 6x6 gessoed, and I'm just picking out my paints and putting them on my palette, clearly having trouble because they're dried up, and just picking a color palette that I want to work with. And a lot of times that's really where I do start. I just pick out the colors for that day that just make me happy. And when you're doing flowers, it's hard not to think pink, but any color will work. And I'm just going in and actually went in with some light colors. And I'm just really sketching with the paint where I want my flowers to be. Just a small little bright brush, meaning it's just got a square edge. And I'm just kind of pecking at the canvas with the paint. Just making these little tiny brush strokes. Adding in some dark, figuring out where I'm going to go with it. Do I want one big flower? Do I want 3 flowers? Again, this is all part of the sketching out what I want. And you'll see that I put the dark there. That's going to be the center of the flower. So I'm really identifying the heart, the darkest part, which is going to be the most center part of the floral. I even painted in some pink stems, just trying to figure out the balance of this piece, where the stem's going to come out from. And like I usually do, I've established that there's going to be light, and I'm figuring out where the edges of the floral is going to be, just again reinforcing that that center is pushed back, and that whatever is whitest, whatever is brightest, that's going to be what's coming out at the viewer first. Adding in a little bit of a lighter pink. Sometimes I put white down and I feel like it's a little too bright, so I have this really, really pale pink, and it's a nice alternative. It's softer, again leading to that more romantic, soft feeling of the floral. All right, so I am using some yellow to go ahead and frame the outside of the floral here. So this is kind of a muted color, so I'm going in with a little bit of white with it, even dulling it down a little further. Going around the edges, and then kind of cleaning off my brush because I tend to pick up a lot of paint too. I feel like that white adds a nice texture to it. If you do anything too flat, it tends to read as flat, and everything you add a little bit more texture to gives it a little bit more visual interest. It's also a fun way too, like let's say you pick up a color that you're like, yeah, I don't like that with the flower. You can always just go over it and mute it down and then keep blending in it to make a new color, or even blending over it to make the color that you want. And this is that light ultramarine blue. I really love this color. And I don't love purple, but for some reason, this one, since it says blue on the packaging, makes it okay. Blending in a little bit of that color. Going up into those stems. I love it when I catch like that pink there on the right side. I love that like it just blends in there and kind of swoops down. Again, I keep repeating this, but it's all an effort to make the background and the foreground part of one story. And there's something about just the blendability of the colors, just it always feels so romantic to me. So I'm actually taking that blend of colors and reblending and moving it up and shaping it around. Sometimes it's just fun too to pick up colors that maybe you wouldn't normally put together. Like I don't always pick up that like muted, dull kind of yellow color, and it was kind of nice coupled with that blue. And now you see me shaping the flowers from the outside in, that push and pull that I keep referencing. I've got that wet on wet working for me, so now I'm just shaping, going around that and blending out what I don't want and shaping it from the outside in. Little greenery. Sometimes it's just good filler too. Like if you feel like you want more color, then you can just throw pops of greenery in there, or even other flowers if you'd like. Now I'm just layering right on top of that wet green with a little bit of white. Adding some texture, and I will go ahead and cover up those pink stems. You can see I'm going back in with that light ultramarine blue, adding a little bit more white, just kind of blending it all back in again. Anytime I put a new layer down, I'm kind of putting another layer on the background to just blend it back in again. And again, all creating a little bit of variety in color. Every time I pick up my brush, it's got a new color on it. Now I'm going in between the stems because I know that the background, if I'm making a glass vase, it's going to reflect the color that's from the background. So I need to make it cohesive all the way across so that the color that's inside of the glass when I paint it looks like the background. It's really kind of freeing, I think, to paint like this, where, you know, it kind of looks like a hot mess, and then all of a sudden when you pull back from it, you're like, oh my God, I just painted a vase of flowers. Again, still adding some layers. And my brush has a little bit of that blue on it. Now it's picking up some of the green. So again, adding that blended color palette. And then I'm going to go in here and shape that flower up again, shape the leaf. I got this really subtle shadow underneath that leaf on the right. Loving that. And like I said earlier, sometimes my backgrounds become more time consuming than even the floral in the foreground. Sometimes it's all about what it's sitting on and how it's blending with the floral that will sit wrong with me or sit right with me. So I just keep blending it back. Again, all part of the story. Now, for the most part, these paintings take about 2 hours for me. And of course, they're sped up because you don't need to see paint dry and see me deliberate. And I'm cutting out the points where I'm sitting there and staring at it for you. But yeah, about 2 hours it takes me to do a 6x6. The larger ones that we'll do at the end, they take days and days. So I want these to be loose. As you're doing this and you're spending most of the day on it, it's too long. Go to a new canvas, go to a new piece of paper, try something new. You're overthinking it and probably overworking it at that point. So I'm just painting in some light, trying to make it like petals, but then you'll see I kind of just blend it back. I want them to really look dimensional. So I'm adding some light to contrast to my darks. And if I've got these flowers facing in the directions that they are, if I've got one facing left and one facing right, one facing at me, it makes sense that I would see that dark center only on that one flower. And now I'm just blending some colors on my palette to get a new color. I don't want the same color kind of flavor going through. So I want to try to create as much variance as I can. Again, casting shadows underneath. You'll see I'll put darker colors when I want to have some kind of shadow casting onto something else. And they're light little touches too. It doesn't mean that you have to take a whole brush stroke. You can just kind of tap the canvas with paint on the edge of the brush. And as you're doing these things, I mean, some of it I do just intuitively, but you know, study the shapes of leaves. Look at what you like about things, color palettes. Go on Pinterest, collect silk flowers or real flowers and just see how they bend, how they catch light, how they fold, where they sit. Are they in the vase? Are they out of the vase? All right, so now very loosely, I just sketched a square in white paint. And I know that my paint is still a little wet, so I'm blending it into it, just like I did on the edge of the flowers. And I basically just sketched myself an outline of a vase, and it's square, and I've just kind of blended it with the background. You'll see me take the edge of the palette knife and kind of press it down to that hard line. That's going to give me the illusion that that's the edge of that piece, and the light is refracted or reflecting off of it. And that palette knife, by picking it up and just using the side of it, I end up getting these really, really bright whites. And that's what you want when something is getting direct light. And I'm taking the brush and just creating the light across the bottom of this vase. You'll see, of course, if light is spewing into it, it'll catch on the bottom of the vase. And that would just be the flat part. What I've painted in would be like the bottom part of the vase kind of reflecting. And all the little catch lights that are reflecting off of the glass. And now I'll make the water line. And I'm making decisions as I go. I've kind of made that blended little line, and now I'll take the edge of that palette knife. And you'll see the difference between using a paintbrush and using the palette knife. Filling it in. Put a little bit of pink in there, basically just reflecting the color of the floral. I've got a little dark. Usually you'll see a little shadow cast under the ring or over the ring of water that goes around the jar, and I'm just kind of putting that color in and then blending it back so I can create a shadow. There will be a shadow. The water actually goes all the way around the jar, so you'll see a little hint of a shadow behind it as well. And now just blending it back. Put a little bit of white on there. It was getting a little bit dark. And the shadow underneath the vase or any object sitting on a table or placed on something is going to be darker. So that's why I have that line, that edge in there. But this is all in that sketchy stage. It's not, you know, finished. I'm still blending and catching, and I've got a little purple on there, catching some light, reflecting the background. I think that's what's most exciting when I paint florals, is that there's these little pops of color. And if you look at flowers, they too have little pops of color that maybe are unexpected. Those little unexpected pieces of happiness that kind of come through. So every once in a while, you'll see me take color like yellow or like this light ultramarine and pop it in there, even sometimes a little bit of pink. And all I'm doing now is I'm taking the stems and I'm adding a little darkness to them because there'd be a shadow. And I'm just kind of bringing them down to the bottom of the vase. It's a little muddied right now, so I'll basically be working now to kind of clean it up. And I want that background to show through. So that's why I go through there and I'm putting in that light ultramarine, because I know my background has been worked over several times with that color and I want it to blend in. I know that that's glass, so I want to be able to see the background through it. And it doesn't have to be the exact same color because it's going to be, you know, distorted because you have glass going through there, but certainly I want it to not look like a totally different color. And this is going to be a square vase, so it's relatively, you know, simple. It's a box. So I'm adding in some lights at the bottom because I know that glass is going to catch the light. The color of glass is clear. However, we have to add color to it to make it look like glass, which is crazy, I know. But there are shadows and there are lights, and that's what's catching on glass. And it also is almost like a mirror reflecting anything that is around it. So you'll see that I'm throwing in little bits of color and kind of manipulating it so that it appears as if it is reflective. Anywhere that gets muddy or if a color blends over, I just go back in. And you'll see that if you're working wet on wet too much, you can end up only making mud. like I'm kind of doing here. But I had to go in with some of that blue to kind of get that muddy color out. And this is a small little brush because I'm working in between things. Sometimes I use a flat brush and just use it sideways, but this little brush is helping me get into all those little detail corners. When you're working on a 6x6, it's rather small, so your brushes need to reflect that and get smaller as you're working. I'm just adding some more brights in there. The brights are saying, okay, this is a reflective surface. It's reflecting light. The whiter the whites, the brighter the light is. And sometimes, like I say, is if you're trying to get the whiter whites, sometimes you got to go a little bit darker with your shadows. And you almost have to think of it as not making a vase, but painting in lighted areas. Where will it shadow? Where will it light? And this is where I do say, even though I don't typically use any kind of still life, it is a really good practice to take a vase of flowers and light it. And even though I kind of feel it's restrictive for me to stare at it, it is an excellent way to learn. And I've also studied the artworks of other people. I just want to find out, what do they do differently? What colors do they use? What shapes? And that's a really good way to learn as well. You'll see this is one of the few pieces that I don't make a straight table. I've kind of made it so it's sitting at an angle. And that's just that light ultramarine blue. So it's actually the color that I was doing in the background, mixing it with white, and now it's just in its pure strength as the table. The idea being that it's actually reflecting up on the glass. I'm just trying to make that crisp line. And I'll continue to reshape the vase and play with color. Again, I'm putting in that light source there. And then I'm going to play around with a little bit more of the shadowing. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of that gray, and I'm going to go into the right side of that and just kind of make it a darker shadow. And by picking up some gray, I'm actually blending into the light ultramarine that's there, and I'm making a new variation of that light ultramarine that's just a little bit darker. It's a tone. It has some of that neutral gray thrown into it to give it a shadow. And I like working on wet for this reason, because I make all these new colors. And again, just crisping up that line a little bit more, pushing and pulling that back. Still reshaping it. And basically, that's it. And I know for me, glass was one of the things I always wanted to paint. So I'm going to include this week another video of another glass vase painting, just so you can get some variation of types of vases that you can paint.